Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
And this is From Akron and Beyond. So welcome, everybody, to this episode. We have a special guest. Calvin Rydbom is with us, and he is a local author and expert on Akron history. I'm calling you an expert, whether or not you say you are or not. Hello, Calvin. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Pretty good today.
Great having you here, buddy.
And
Thanks, Nick.
we got to know Calvin really from his second book. I think it's his second book, which was The Akron Sound. And in that book, he really talked about the Akron rock scene, and particularly those years of the late 1970s into the 1980s, where, you know, Akron kind of was identified with the music scene around here and became internationally known for that. But he keeps up with bands today and is a huge, not only fan of music, but very knowledgeable on it. And we wanted to have him on here to talk about music, but also to talk about just his work on Akron and what he's accomplished so far and where he's heading next with his next project. So I'd like to start off, though, with the music angle, which is basically when you think about getting into music, what was the first thing that you listened to that you liked? What was it? You know, was it radio? Was it an album? Was it a sibling? Or
I'm actually going to go with probably late 60s, early 70s as a kid, seeing the Monkees TV show on Saturday morning.
Yeah,
was probably where I started really getting into music.
Mm-hmm, that makes sense.
You know, I know that a week or so ago, you and I went to see Robin Hitchcock in Cleveland, and you'd mentioned that how many concerts you had seen in the last couple of days, and there's another one you wanted to go to, but there's another 2 or 3 ahead of that you wanted to go to. So, how many concerts did you go to last month?
Oh, I was about to say only like 4 or 5, Nick.
It was a lot you wanted to go to.
Yeah. And I'm not going. I mean, before COVID, we were going to probably like 25 to 30 a year, but we've kind of slowed down, you know, now that things are back. And just for the record, Bob, the Akron Soundbook was actually my 5th book.
Oh.
I had one on Burton, Ohio, Twinsburg, Ohio. They were both clients of mine. Mm-hmm. I had Cleveland Area Disasters, 1900 to 1950, and then the Modern Akron book. So Akron Sound was number 5.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, thank you for correcting me. I did not realize that.
Well, one last musical question. Not one last one, but what was the first rock concert you attended, or concert that you would, it wasn't a school thing?
I'm going to think Thin Lizzy, maybe at the Cleveland Agora, late 70s.
The original group? I mean,
yeah. Phil was still alive.
Oh, man.
Nick, what was the first concert you went to? I'm going to guess Vic Damone, maybe?
You know what? I actually, at the Akron Armory, which is a great venue, but, people went to Saturday night wrestling events there, but I went to one of those, but actually the Young Bloods at the Armory.
Oh, wow.
I was like 15.
Okay, interesting. Anyway, so the book that we won't go into the Burton and Twinsburg one so much, but the book on Modern Akron.
Yeah.
What was the impetus for writing that?
Well, honestly, it was the publisher, because I had not been living in Akron. Recently I had been in Cleveland, and I had done a few books up there. And I moved back to Akron for various reasons. And I called the publisher I was mostly using, that does Arcadian History Press, that I wanted to change my address because I had moved to Summit County. They got really excited because Akron was one of the cities they had pegged as not having enough publications on.
Oh, okay.
So they're like, you're down in Akron? And, do this book on modern Akron, because somebody's done an old Akron. So I did something about Akron going from 1960 to now. And their sales manager for this area told me when he was out selling it to places that, man, it is that music chapter you did that's really driving the sales of this book.
Okay.
and then I moved into the Akron Soundbook.
Right. Yeah, that was a natural transition.
Yeah.
Right.
It's funny. Like I probably, and I was just a kid. When I would go to the bank at first, and then JB's, and probably Robin Hood. I was there listening to Hammer Damage and the Nelsons, and Unit 5 and those bands, and I never really thought anything special was going on. Just Friday and Saturday, I went to JB's or Robin Hood. Sundays, I went to Ramones and heard cover bands. They were the only people who had live music Sunday. And then just never thought it was any big deal. It was just live music. And then...
You went to Ramones and it was still called Ramones?
Yeah. Yeah. U.S. Metal and Hard Roads played Sunday nights.
Oh, yeah, because we
That's a great
Because for a brief period of time, it was, it turned into a place called the Nightclub, and the Bizarros got to handle Monday night bookings there, but that goes back a ways.
Yeah, but it was like I just hung out at those clubs when I was young, and I get back here and like it's a big thing, and you got to write on this time. Like okay.
How'd you get started as a writer?
So for many years, I owned a small chain of camera stores.
No,
and then digital came roaring in, and then the market decided I no longer needed to own a small chain of camera stores. And I had a master's degree in literature. And I thought a friend of mine was starting library school, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I talked to Kent State, and they're like, oh, people come out of library school all the time knowing how to work at libraries, but nobody knows how to manage them. A small business owner like you will be a branch manager in a couple of years. I'm like, that sounds like a cool thing. And then, no offense to anybody who works at libraries, I investigate a little. It's like, no, I just can't. The local library is probably not a thing for me.
Right. Okay.
And I got into archiving while in grad school, and the first book on Burton, I was hired by Burton themselves to set up a website on their history, and then write a book for them. And it just sort of. I developed a couple partners that I worked with, and we just started doing websites and historical research. And we actually had offices down at the PBS station in Cleveland for years because we archived the entire collection of Idea Stream.
Oh, okay.
Really?
So it was cool to actually have an office to hang out at.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So it's all been kind of just an organic thing, right?
Yep.
Just sort of one thing grew into another. Yeah. Interesting. So the Modern Akron book, you said the chronicle begins in 1960?
Yeah.
So that had to be an interesting book to write because you're kind of writing about the final heydays of the old Akron, right, of the rubber industry and stuff, but then you are also getting into the complete collapse of that.
Well, to an extent, I tend to go kind of positive a lot. And this was an Arcadia book, so it was a lot of pictures more than a History Press book.
Right.
Was Ruby in there? Ruby and the Romantics?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. But it was a lot of like the rubber industry was collapsing, but I talked a lot about polymer science and how there was like over 400 companies in Summit County using polymer as their main thing. So I talked a lot about it turning into a technological town, and that's what kept its economy going.
Right.
Especially when a lot of places really kind of collapsed in the early part of this century.
Sure.
Akron still stayed okay because they moved from the rubber capital of the world to the polymer capital of the world. And there was a chapter on athletics and the downtown changing and of course a music chapter.
Right. Well, no, there's no doubt that the transition from the industrial powerhouse that Akron was to a post-industrial reality, Akron pulled that off a lot better than a lot of cities did.
Yeah.
A lot of cities remain basically just empty shells,
and it's funny, when I was sending in some initial pictures and writing, my editor called me shocked because she was like, yeah, you're sending me all, I think of Akron as, a factory town. You're sending me all this stuff of like parks. I'm like, no, we have a thriving park system here. I said, and I was driving on Smith at the time. I said, actually, I'm driving past the Cyberling Nature Realm and a couple parks right now.
Right.
There's a lot about Akron that people outside of Akron don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I think something that is sort of a testimonial to that is the number of people I know who have moved out of Akron, like when they were younger, and it's kind of like, I've had it. I'm moving to, a real city or whatever. And then like 10 years, 15 years later, they move back and they're kind of like, I didn't realize how good I had it here, and just, cost of living and the we're not far from Cleveland. So you have access to all the culture that's there, but also everything that's around here. And like my daughter lives in Chicago now and she loves it. But one thing she really misses is she says, to go to the woods, you have to get in a car and drive like 10 or 15 miles because there are, there's the parks there, but they're not the same. They're not the same. They're not as, as untamed as our parks are, national parks are and stuff. So, yeah, it's the kind of thing a lot of people take for granted, I think. Yeah. So how long, with that book, how long did it take you to write it?
I would say probably about a year.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm not all that driven. So it kind of gets done for about 9 months, and then my editor reminds me that I have a deadline, and then I power write for 2 months. So I say it takes a year, but it takes much shorter than that when I actually get moving.
All these shows you're going to get in the way. Right?
Yeah.
Well, this is From Akron and Beyond. And I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host Nick Nicholas. And our guest today is Calvin Rydbom, a local author. And he writes books about Akron. And he also wrote the book The Akron Sound. And I guess we should talk about that book some because it is a terrific chronicle of that time and that scene. So I know you interviewed me for it. Was that your basic MO? How did you approach writing that book?
Yeah, I did a lot of oral histories to get information. And I did a fair amount of research. And honestly, I was too young for the crypt, but I got in the bank a number of times. The first couple of times the ID might not have been legit, but I got in the bank a number of times. And I was definitely at JB's and the Robin Hood and a couple of those other Kent bars. And it's funny, everybody that went there, the people that played there, everybody's like, I had no idea I was part of something that someday people would look at as important to write books on. I was just going out Friday and Saturday night.
Right.
And I've always were going to go to a bar that had live music as opposed to just a bar. So, it just, then when the Modern Akron book came out, my publisher told me, hey, what's driving these sales is the music. People all want to hear about that Akron sound era, especially the people who are there. They want to read about themselves. Yeah.
Right.
Because there's some people that are all about the music they made back then.
Oh, yes.
I remember when you interviewed the Bizarros for the book, and you had mentioned that you were talking to some other people, by telephone and emails. Didn't you talk to Buzz Click?
Yeah, I talked to Buzz. I talked to Buzz and I talked to Rod.
Did you?
And Donnie.
Oh.
So, yeah. And it's odd. So you guys, Terry, the Parkins, you guys have been friends since grade school. And your narrative was the same, because even when the Bizarros weren't going, you guys still hung out. So when you guys told stories about the band, you were like, yeah, that's how it happened. when I talk to bands like, I haven't talked to them in 10 years because one's in Nashville and one's in L.A., I'm like, were you guys in the same room?
I remember a couple years ago when Mark Mothersbaugh was in town for his art, installation. Got to talk a little bit, and I had delayed reading Dave Giffords' book on Devo for years. I don't know why, but I had recently read it and asked him a few things about it, and he actually said, well, if all four members of Devo were to write a book, everyone would be totally different.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a Rashomon thing, I guess. People have their, their own take on how things went, and I'm sure some of the stuff that I've said on the show in some of these episodes, some of the people that I worked with would have a different take on some of those things.
Unit 5 is greater than Jesus.
Yeah, right. I don't remember saying that, but did you feel like you got good cooperation from everybody, or you don't have to name names. I'm just curious if there were some people who were like, I don't want to talk about this. I can see that, for some people the memories might not be that good for whatever reason.
I have probably 30 some oral histories.
It's funny. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about exactly, but I'm going to tell the story anyway because it always interests me. You're talking about how bands or artists remember their careers. And I always think about, and of course there's no comparison here at all between any of our Akron bands and the Rolling Stones. Okay. But with the Rolling Stones, there was a huge interview with Mick Jagger. This is like maybe 30 years ago. It's certainly over 20 in Rolling Stone magazine. And it was this, whole career spanning interview with Mick. And the thing that always amazed me about that interview was that they would ask him, they went through album by album. And so they'd say like, okay, so next up is Sticky Fingers. And Jagger would say like, okay, now what's on that one? And it was like, he honestly didn't really know. And it was, I'm thinking there's millions of people who could tell you every song in order, how long each song was, who played on what, who got ripped off by the Stones because somebody else really wrote it, whatever.
But the really cool thing about Mick, maybe not the really cool thing, but one thing I've noticed where he's like, yeah, I don't remember any of that. If you ask him the sales figures,
he
knows that.
He did graduate from financial university, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at him, they see him on stage like, he's a rocker and this, that. And that man's a businessman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and to your point, in that same interview, when they would ask him, well, so what are your favorite Stones songs? And you'd think that maybe he'd pull one or two deep cuts out somewhere. No, it was like Satisfaction.
Biggest sellers.
It was clearly like what would be on, a greatest hits album. That, someone it was just so obvious that that's how he views it, but which is fine. It's just interesting.
This is neither here nor there, but it's a story that pops up in my mind that I never got to use in the book. What you're talking about, not comparing yourself to the Stones. A story Harvey told me about Ray Davies visiting Bears View Studio and Harvey driving around. He said we were driving around. I was driving him back to the train station. And we were both talking about problems we were having with our band. And after I dropped them off, I was thinking like, I'm talking about my problems with Tim Huey, and he's talking about the Kinks.
So ultimately then with the Akron Sound book, that got it was successful, right? I mean, It seemed to, I saw it a lot of places and it seemed like it was selling. So congratulations on that. Now that's led to your next project. And you've mentioned it to me off mic, but talk to our audience a little bit about what you're working on now. I think the premise is very interesting.
Well, a couple years ago, I kind of really got tired of reading people online complaining and saying Akron doesn't preserve their history and Akron's tearing down yet another building. Mm-hmm. And people just don't seem to like grasp the idea that downtown cannot stay looking like it's 1938.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they're always complaining. And they always want to jump on Akron U and Suma about they're tearing this down or tearing that down when they preserve a lot. So I started looking at it, and there's something like 57 standing buildings on the National Register of Historic Places in Akron.
That many?
Well, there's 57 locations. There's well over 100 buildings because there's a number of neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah.
Or business districts. So there's well over 100 buildings that the National Park System has listed as historic on their register in Akron. And I just felt the need to talk about that.
Absolutely.
Sort of document it. Right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the book's basically a number of essays that run from 1,000 to 1,200 pages, or 1,200 words on every one of these locations. Mm-hmm. It's a little like a tour guide, really. Like this is this cool place, and here's some stories about it, and it's there's a rumor that Thomas Edison actually put the light on the porch here.
Okay.
Is there a picture for every listing?
Yeah, there's going to be a here and now. Yeah, so there's going to be like, this is in 1932, and this is now. Yeah, then and now. So I know that comment didn't make any sense, but the Lewis Miller House, which is now apartments, Lewis Miller was a very famous inventor, really did a lot with the plow, actually, and then something called the Akron Plan, which is how churches get built.
Yeah.
His daughter was Thomas Jefferson's second wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson's second marriage was in Akron. It was the social event of, a couple decades then. And the rumor's always been that the light there at the Miller House was installed by Thomas Jefferson.
Isn't that building up that steep hill?
Yeah.
Yeah, Cadillac Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've seen that.
I did not know that about Jefferson. That's fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. What brought him to Akron? Do you remember? Or do you?
I think he probably met Lewis Miller's daughter and said, like, hey,
oh, okay,
I'm coming over. But at the time, like, Miller's kind of forgotten, but he was like a significant inventor, and the Akron Plan, which all these churches used, how to build a church.
I don't really know what the Akron Plan is. Tell me about this.
Basically, it's an idea where the sanctuary is in the middle of the church, and then around it would be all the Sunday schools and rooms.
Okay.
So it was a way then that the rooms would open and all the kids would come into the sanctuary after the Sunday schools. But it was just a plan on how to build a church and integrate Sunday school, which was not a long-standing tradition, but a newer one, into the main services.
Okay.
Isn't that the one building that caught fire and was damaged by Akron U that Bob and I were talking about a couple weeks ago? Isn't that the one where it was pioneered at?
There's a couple. There's actually two different churches in Akron that claim to be the first one to use the Akron Plan. And if you look at their arguments, they both sort of have a point, but I don't take sides, like that's not a good idea. But yeah, there's actually a number of churches on the register.
Yeah, well, if you drive around Akron at all, it's striking. It's, to me anyway, how many old churches there are, and it can be in any neighborhood. But I was noticing, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, I had the occasion to drive through the Firestone Park area, and it's like on almost every block is a different church in a different denomination. And I'm like, boy, these churches must have been thriving, at one point, because, it's like, a Presbyterian, a Congregational, a Catholic church, a Lutheran church.
It's not exactly a church, but, the Balch Street Athletic Center was the Akron Jewish Center for decades.
Right.
Well, the immigrants at that time, whether they're Greek or Italian or German, Irish, they had their own little hubs, where they felt comfortable and secure, you know.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and that's something that has obviously transformed over the years. I mean, if you've been here, lived here long enough, you associate like North Hill with it was an Italian area, right? But of course now it's more of a Asian area.
Absolutely,
yeah.
yeah.
A lot of Mon people are there and people from Nepal, and transformation there has been amazing and good for the city because there's a lot of great food.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of really
Absolutely.
excellent restaurants that are you can go up and down there.
I know this is a project you've been working on for a while, but it's going to be a while before we get to see it.
And sometime next year, I would say.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, there's some. I'm always shocked how many people I run into that have no idea that AA started in Akron and Dr. Bob's house, which is actually also on the national landmark list, which is a much bigger deal than just the register.
Right.
We have a lot. Like we have the John Brown house and Cyberling Mansion. I mean, there's just we've kept a lot of our history intact.
Calvin, when you're working on any of these books, but let's say the one you're working on now, do you find yourself learning a lot of stuff as you're doing your research?
No, I'm all knowing. To begin with. Yeah, I learn a lot of stuff.
I walked right into that one.
I learn a lot of stuff. I mean, so where the old Akron Art Museum was, well, it went to a couple places, but there was they had a location by Akron U for a number of years that caught fire in the beginning, the early part of the 20th century, actually close to World War II. And for some reason, and probably there was a local collector, it had the two largest collection of art from the Philippines, outside the Philippines, in the world.
Oh, wow.
And, and we lost it during that fire.
Oh, gee. Yeah.
And the other collection at the time was also lost. It was during World War II. I think it was just because of the world that going on. But to find out that Akron had this unique collection,
Yeah.
I mean,
Amazing.
and weird stuff like that happens. I mean, the Massillon Museum down there, which has one of the largest collection of circus memorabilia in the world, because a guy that lived there for years collected circus memorabilia.
He was a dentist, and he uses dental tools to sculpt everything, create it.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff is just, it's an oddity. Like somebody did this, and and just not to be macabre, but like the Glenwood Cemetery, it was built by a fairly wealthy guy in town because his son died, and the cemeteries we had in Akron weren't great at the time, let's say.
Okay.
So he traveled the East Coast looking at different cemeteries to get an idea of what he wanted to build in Akron. And the macabre part is they had to keep his son preserved for that year.
Yeah. Is that chapel, by the way, at Glendale on the register?
So I said Glenwood, Glendale.
Yeah.
It's it's kind of cool. The whole cemetery is on the register, but then 4 separate buildings in the cemetery, including the chapel, are also on the register.
Beautiful stained glass.
Yeah. I guess I asked that question because I'm learning a lot just today with some of the stuff you're telling us. I want to go back for a moment to the Akron Sound book, because I can't say that title of that book without wanting to ask you about your involvement in the Akron Sound Museum, and which I know you were a big part of, and that's going to go on to a new home here. Tell us about that.
Well,
tell us about the origins of it, how it started.
Origin.
Wayne Beck, who's passed away a few years ago, he had been working on it for a few years, running around town, trying to raise money, talking to people. And I had met Wayne during the Modern Akron book, and I had met Jimmy Image as well, because Jimmy and Wayne had done a project together.
Really?
Yeah, they had a short pop-up where the Children's Museum is now by Lock 3. They had a small pop-up there.
I saw that I didn't know that they were the ones involved with that.
Mm-hmm. And Wayne invited me to an event they were having at like Tony's Club, Music Box. They were having an event there.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, honestly, to be honest, I went in seeing them as a potential client because I was doing a lot of freelance archiving there. Mm-hmm. But we never really raised enough money to pay me. In fact, I wound up paying for a lot of stuff. But, I mean, the more I got into it, I wrote the book. I became friends with so many people. And then when Wayne became ill and eventually passed away, I felt really a moral obligation to keep it going because I had sort of made promises to a lot of people, like we're going to do this and this, and I had become good friends with Wayne over those couple of years, so I wanted to keep it going, and we were in the bomb shelter for a number of years.
You had a room there for the museum?
Mm-hmm.
And the bomb shelter is... explain what that is for some people that don't know.
The bomb shelter, how to explain it?
It's a cool old building. It's repurposed into eternal flea market of cool stuff.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, it's not a regular thrift store. It's focused on cool stuff. You don't get junk there. You get cool collectibles, and it's immense.
Everything from old tire molds to
like
vinyl records,
pieces of furniture.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we were there for a number of years, and I'd be remiss not to, give a little shout out to Steve McKee of the F Models, who worked there and really took a hand at keeping things looking good and shepherding it through those years there.
Great guy.
Yeah, and then not too long ago, we talked to Dave Lieberthal, who's doing the Akron History Center downtown, and we felt that, and by we, I mean there was Jimmy, there is Dick Robbins at the Firestone Country Club, who was on the board, and Jill from Jilly's, that this was a really good move. That it would be part of Akron history to move it there. So we just made that decision to get it down with all the other cool Akron history when they're able to open that.
Are you going to have is there going to be a section in the Akron History Museum that's going to be devoted to Akron music?
I think now and then. I think Dave's idea is to sort of move things in and out in a rolling thing of exhibits. But yeah, it's not just going to be stored in a closet somewhere. It is going to be exhibited.
Good.
Yeah, I play a small role in this because I am a former librarian, and a lot of this material is going to go to the Akron-Summit County Public Library's main library. And so I was asked by them if I wanted to help kind of go through the materials and kind of pull things out that, well, this would be great for the Akron History Center, and maybe this would be something that we should definitely keep for the library, in archives or whatever. Sort of make value judgments on it. And so Jim Carney, who formerly worked for the Akron Beacon Journal, coincidentally Patrick Carney's father, Pat of the Black Keys, he's an old good friend of mine, and he's involved in this as well. And we consult with Calvin about it, and with the library, and with the people from the Summit County Historical Society. So this is an ongoing project, and I think that the center is, it's like your book. It's going to be next year, I think, before that opens. But sounds exciting.
Some of the archives that were in the Sound Museum are going to be part of the archives of the library?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. So this is From Akron and Beyond. This is Bob Ethington. I'm with my co-host, Nick Nicholas, and our special guest for this episode is Calvin Rydbom, local author on all things Akron and beyond. It's funny, we're talking about things that are notable in Akron, and when I worked for the library, one of my jobs was the main event speaker series, where we brought in writers from all over the country, or in other, sometimes artists, sometimes filmmakers, to speak at our main library auditorium. And so I usually was sort of the, host for these people, and would pick them up at the airport and drive them around, and they'd always be asking questions about Akron. And so I'd say, well, this was what struck me was how many people don't even realize the tire connection anymore. Like, I mean, about half of them did, or knew, or were aware of it. But the other half, I'm like, yeah, have you ever heard of Goodyear? Have you ever heard of Firestone? Their offices were here. Their plants were here. A lot of people didn't even know that. So as it went on, I always found that, like, the things that always could ring a bell of recognition with people was Devo. Yeah. As the years went on, Black Keys, and then Jeffrey Dahmer. That was always a winner. And then LeBron. And to my point here, before I retired, my family, we went to visit my son, who was living in Thailand at the time, working in the Peace Corps. And so we got to stay with this family there and meet a lot of people in not just Bangkok, but like in Mae Sot, which is, like a regular town in Thailand. And, there was a kind of real language barrier because they couldn't really speak much English, and I could speak no Thai. LeBron was the one word that I could say that they all knew.
Beautiful.
It's
they love basketball in Asia, I guess is the point.
One thing you said that kind of pops into my mind is that Wayne and I, in the beginning, when we really got the museum up and started doing more pop-ups, we were very careful, not that they're not a great band, but to not make the Akron Sound Museum Devo-centric. We wanted to talk about everybody and not completely focus on Devo.
Right.
And I think we were pretty successful with that.
I think so.
Well, I would agree, yes. Having gone through that stuff, definitely.
Yeah. There's plenty of Devo stuff. I mean, you got the jumpsuit,
right.
Mark's jumpsuit we have.
Yeah.
And
Energy Dome.
Yeah. But yeah, we made a real effort not to make it Devo-centric, to cover everybody. And we started moving into outside of that, like 75 to 82 period, because Akron's always like swung out of its class music-wise. When the Akron sound was going on, you had the same movement that birthed Howard Hewitt of Shalimar and the Ingram brothers.
Right.
You had the Humbard family down the street doing like one of the biggest religious recording empires in the world. And then you go back. I mean, I think a lot of people in the 50s got introduced to jazz by Peter Gunn. The girl singer in the club was from Akron.
Yes. I just learned that recently.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that is funny.
Von Monroe, one of the biggest recording artists of the 50s, is from Akron. There were a couple New York Metropolitan Opera stars from the 30s from Akron. Grandpa Jones from Hee Haw, first radio appearance, WAKR, 1931. We just did a lot. I was never there, but I've heard just legends about the hip hop shows that went on at the Akron Civic that rivaled, the night at the Apollo.
Right.
Music has, for decades and decades, has always been much bigger in Akron than other towns its size. Who knows why? But.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, you're right. The part of the homegrown talent I can't explain that, but I think partially in terms of great artists that would tour through here, I think it was kind of en route, right? It was kind of like, well, you'd stop in Akron, then you'd go to Chicago, or it was just kind of part of that tour. And it's come up before on our podcast, our radio show, about the amazing music scene that existed on Howard Street in the 40s and the 1950s, and how a lot of that is lost now. But you go back through archives of the Beacon Journal, or and just look at the ads for who was playing, and it's just amazing.
Duke Ellington,
Billie Holiday,
Now, what part of that Bob just mentioned is documented in the Sound Museum? Do you have posters of some of those events?
Not a lot. We have some stuff from the Howard Street jazz scene. We got a few things just donated, and then we got some interviews with I'm drawing a blank now, the young sax player, and I feel terrible, I can't think of his name right now. Justin Tibbs.
Oh, okay.
Justin Tibbs gave me some stuff that he had done interviews with some older people before they had passed away, and I got that from Justin.
Okay.
So
that's cool. I've played a few shows with Justin. I didn't realize he had done that research. That's interesting. Yeah, yeah.
He shared with me a very scary story, I'm sure, with him at one point when he was really starting to get going, interviewing some of these older people that are into their life, and one of them said, well, it's left to you now to keep the tradition of our music on. Wow, I would not want that kind of burden.
Wow.
Yeah, that's like something out of Lord of the Rings or something.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, well, that's a whole nother subject, and we're going to have to delve into that, Nick, at some point, is that jazz scene of that era. But
there was both a book and a movie that somebody was working on about 10 years ago, a documentary on it, and then a book, but I think the publisher fell through or funding fell through, but I've seen the trailer for the movie, but
really?
It just...
Wow, got that far. Huh?
It just never happened.
Yeah.
Well, they put together a couple things, more a promo piece to raise money than a trailer, but yeah, they really wanted to do a documentary and book on it, and it just fell through.
Yeah. Because I would find that fascinating. Because I have this suspicion that, just a lot of those memories, it's kind of a lost history, because that neighborhood those buildings got torn down, and it's just, a lot of people don't even realize that happened. You tell them that, and they're like amazed.
Well, there was an African American newspaper in Akron for many years, and I know it's one of the centers at Akron U has an archive of all those little newspapers.
Okay.
So reviews, stories, all that.
Maybe even ads.
They exist.
Yeah.
Advertisements.
In a vault somewhere with all these old newspapers.
Yeah.
So it's there for people that want to do the research.
I'd like to find somebody, though, that can talk about it. I'm a busy man, I'm not sure I have the time for all this research stuff like you do. But I would be curious about that. Well, this has been From Akron and Beyond. Our guest has been Calvin Rydbom, Akron writer, and I urge you to check out his books. They're available at bookstores locally, and it's been great having you here, Calvin, so thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
And we will see you guys next time.
So just in case anybody goes into Barnes & Noble's and buys one of my books, if they open it up and it looks like it's autographed, it probably is, because it's sort of a little weird quirk of mine. If I'm somewhere and I see one of my books on the shelf, I'll open it up and autograph it and put it back on the shelf, because I just think that's funny.
I think Dave Giffel said that a lot of his are autographed too, but that's strategic, because that way they can't be returned.
All right. On that note, thanks for everybody, and we'll see you next time.